Right. Okay.
How did you come here? When did you come here?
I came here in January of 1971, and I came here newly wedded to a Spaniard. We met at Ohio State University, where I was just minding my own business.
Where are you from?
I'm from Columbus, Ohio.
That's a town I know well.
Mm-hmm.
And Catalan, you lived here?
No. Actually, Julio was born in Sevilla, raised in Madrid from the time he was very small, and had lived and worked many places around Spain. And he found out about a scholarship program for graduate work in the United States, and they sent him to Ohio State, like they could have sent him anywhere else.
Great. And had you been to Spain before?
I had never been to Spain.
No? Had you been to Europe before?
I had not been to Europe before.
Well, that was quite a jump.
It was quite a jump. It was a leap of faith.
It was love, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And when you got here, was it more or less what you were expecting? Or
Oh, good heavens, no. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't that, no. Because also when we arrived, my husband had taken a year's sabbatical from his work as an engineer with the Ministerio de Obras Públicas. At that time he was stationed in Castellón de la Plana, which meant that we went to Castellón to live. And that was about as far removed from any reality that I knew. And of course I thought that that's where we were going to be living forever. And that was not easy. From there we moved to Valencia, so that made it much easier. And from Valencia, finally, in 1975, we moved to Barcelona. And I would say that once I arrived in Barcelona, I felt at home, and it's felt like home ever since.
Mm-hmm. And in Valencia, when you were there, was it in those days, was it different in Valencia and Barcelona, more different than to the United States than it would be now? Things more similar all around? Was it a real foreign country then?
Oh yeah, no, it was a real foreign country, and Valencia in recent years has, as we all know, really just soared as far as improvements in all ways, architecturally, culturally, socially, in all ways. But in 1971, a young architect who I knew, and she was giving me French lessons because she had studied in the Sorbonne, she summed it up. She said at that time, she said, Valencia, the Valencians think that it's a small city. It isn't. It's a big pueblo. and it was, because it was their industry was agriculture. It was basically at that time, oranges, which it still is, of course, and ceramic tiles, but ceramic tiles before Isabel Preisler and porcelanosa. And so it was a very agriculturally based society, and not at all European, not at all cosmopolitan, not at all, you could see this in the shops, you could see it in all ways. Life was easier for me in Valencia because I was not being pointed at on the street as la extranjera, which I was on occasion in Castellón. That was not easy for a 22-year-old. And so in that way, it was easier, and also what made all the difference in the world is that I began meeting people and making friends, and among these many friends were many Americans who were living in Valencia, strangely enough, because they were studying medicine. At that time, that was not uncommon. That Americans who had finished their undergraduate school and for one reason or another, either age, grades, or whatever, and decided they wanted to go to medical school. If they weren't able to get in, they came to Europe often. And so many of these students were in Valencia, and we live very near the university, and so that made a huge difference right there, just a touch of home. And some of these friends remain friends 37 years later, very dear friends.
When you moved to Barcelona, when in 1975 did you move to Barcelona?
We moved here in September 75, 2 months before Franco's death.
Where were you when Franco died?
I was celebrating Thanksgiving in the States, in fact. So I had one more thing to be thankful for.
Did you, when you came, did you notice rastros and things, I mean, about Franco? Were you aware of the tension and the fact that Franco was dying and all of that? Did it affect your life in any way? Or?
I'm sorry, towards the end.
When you came to Barcelona.
Oh, when I arrived in Barcelona, well, I would say that from 1971 on until November of 75, everyone had to notice the presence of Franco in everyday life, in everything you heard, everything you had shown to you on television, in the news, in magazines, anything. Towards the end, I mean, his death took forever, as we all know, and the tension and the political unrest and the uncertainty, more than anything, the uncertainty on all parts. Of course, it was very strong. You could feel that. You could feel tension in the air, absolutely. But I think that was pretty much anywhere in Spain.
Yeah. But looking back on those, when you first got here, what kind of detail would you say, and if you were going to try to explain to somebody how life was like then in the streets in Barcelona or daily life in Barcelona, how it was different from what it might be today, what kind of detail of those days would you pick out? I mean, I guess it was mostly, where did you live when you came here in September of 75?
In Barcelona, you mean? We were living in Sarrià on Manuel Girona.
I guess there were little shops where you would go to, I mean,
Yeah,
that sort of thing?
Yes. Oh, yeah, well, yeah, there were just starting to be grocery stores, I mean, supermarkets, etc. But, I mean, when I lived in Valencia, there wasn't even a Corte Inglés. I mean, you went to the Central Market, and I remember receiving, in Castellón, oh my gosh, I remember receiving letters from my sister-in-law, "Dear Chicken Plucker," because she knew that my life was suddenly set to a schedule of going to the poultry shop, going to the cheese shop, going to this shop, and then going home and plucking the chicken, and etc. So it was a bit of a change from university life. And so yes, the conveniences obviously were improving over the years, and what was considered the norm was changing. There was a shift in that. Life got easier in many different ways. I mean, just in the basics of having a washing machine, and then eventually even having a dryer, and oh my gosh, a dishwasher. And
how were you washing clothes when you first came here, for instance, in 75?
Well, I had a washing machine, but I think I could put only one sheet in, not both. So everything was just more time-consuming, and then taking the clothes up to the roof to hang, etc. So I mean, you just found. I don't think even if women had been able to work like they are today, we wouldn't have been able to, because there was no time in your day just to get the normal basic things done for daily living took up your day. Yeah. And so fortunately all of that has changed.
So but women in those days weren't working? Very few
women were working. I think that always in Barcelona you found more women working than elsewhere in Spain, anywhere else in Spain, because of the society as it is and because of the entrepreneurship always being much stronger here than in the rest of Spain. But you certainly didn't find women managerial groups. You didn't find, no. I mean, a lot of women had their shops, and there were women in secretarial and administrative jobs, of course, but you didn't find many career women, that's for certain.
Mm-hmm. When did that start to change?
When did that start to change? I would say in the 80s. I think that one of the things that I've most have observed as one of the huge social changes within Spain has been the family infrastructure, the family structure rather has changed tremendously, and I think that it's very interactive in as much as, because what I've just mentioned about the women really being tied to home in order to make things work. At the same time, the pill was forbidden, of course. That was illegal. I remember going to see Love Story when it first came out, and went with a group of friends, among them some Spanish men, and one of them later told us that his mother had seen the film, and she was sure that the Ali McGraw had died at the end as punishment for having taken the pill. So that gives you a bit of a insight as to the mentality. Okay, I'm mentioning this because women, the role was women got married, women had children, and women had as many children as God would send them. And they were tied to the home, but they also had the family structure, including the mother and the mother-in-law many times, who were living with them in the not so big apartments. So what happens? The modern conveniences are now introduced into the homes. It's making it easier to get out and to do other things, and more the universities are open to everyone, of course, but now more and more of the young women want to continue their studies. And now they are seeing that because of the press now being much more open, they're more aware of what's happening in the rest of the world. And so you have huge numbers of young women who are going into the university, finishing, and wanting to do something with their lives besides plucking chickens.
Were you aware early on after coming here of the whole Catalan question, or was it something that you didn't know anything about Catalonia really?
I have my husband to thank me for knowing about it before coming. Actually, we had just arrived from Valencia, and he was already signing up for Catalan lessons. Now, I must say, my husband is a civil engineer, but is also a linguist. He has always been interested in languages. When he was living in Madrid, in his university days, he was already going to the bookshops looking for Catalan books, because he had made a visit to Barcelona when Catalan was not being spoken much on the streets, but he was fascinated by the culture and the language, so he was already interested in that. So as soon as we arrived in Barcelona, and he began his Catalan lessons, and I did as well. He continued, I did not. I was taking French at the same time and found it very confusing. And but in any case, I've continued since then. So yes, we were aware of the Catalan situation because immediately we were, contrary to las malas lenguas, as they say, the Catalan associates of Julio immediately had us in their homes, inviting us, and most of them were Catalans. And so firsthand we were seeing what was happening there. And curiously enough, once Franco died and then everyone was studying Catalan, many of these Catalan friends were calling Julio to have him help them with their grammar, because they had never written their own language before. And so yes, we were aware of the whole Catalan. We began from an early stage, let's say, to learn about it and to get deeper and deeper into what it was all about.
Must have been an exciting time for people here, I would think.
Very much so. Very much so. It was a very liberating feeling, but with a huge question mark. I mean, I'm sure because you were here, Richard, you also probably know all those jokes about, is Franco really dead? I mean, people really had trouble accepting the fact that he was, in fact, not coming back. And a lot of people didn't want him to be dead. And so the political unrest that you found in the universities here, with the police on horseback going through the classrooms, etc., I mean, that was a pretty frightening time. There were still a lot of political murders, executions taking place. I remember we had a trip to Paris planned. Julio was going to give a speech, And we received a call saying, no, do not go, because they had just executed some young Catalans, and there was going to be a lot of protest in Paris, and that it was not advisable that we be there near the ministries, etc., etc. So there was a lot of political unrest, there was a lot of uncertainty, but at the same time it was an exhilarating moment because of the unknown, that uncertainty. You, at the same time, people had the feeling that anything was possible. After 40 years of Franco now, anything was possible.
And at first, I mean, did you find this, some people commented to us that while Franco was alive, and in fact, for some time after he died, there was a real culture of fear in place here, that people were scared, and that, did you find that true when you were here?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you're living in a society in which you know that there's a total control of communication, of information, of what is being taught in the schools. Once you are aware of that, now, was everyone in Spain aware of that? Probably not, because that's all they had lived. That's all they had experienced. But anyone who had lived elsewhere, who had traveled, or simply who had made the thought process necessary to come to the conclusion that this was not what should be, or this was not the norm in other parts of the world. Yes, there was a matter of fear, and on a personal level, I mean, I didn't feel scared to walk the streets. I didn't feel fear in my daily life, maybe, but there was that all-present knowing that we were living in a dictatorship. We were living under the control of one man, and one man that certainly didn't have my admiration for anything that he had done. So yes, there was fear. There was fear because you would hear conversations of people from different sides, different political sides, and you would see fear in their eyes. You would okay, sorry.
You can get that.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you go to the celebration?
I didn't go to the celebration. I remember definitely watching it on television. Yes. Yeah. It was exciting. It was very exciting. It felt right. It felt right.
Yeah.
And it was a big step in the right direction, I feel. Mm-hmm.
And over the course of those years, describe to me a little more, if you would, the sense that anything was possible, and particularly in Catalonia, and if you had Catalan friends, how you saw them reacting to the years after Franco was there.
Well, I would say that, first of all, it was very exciting to see our friends, to see a new side of our friends that had not existed until that time. They suddenly became much more aware of the importance of their own culture and their own language. Many of them did speak Catalan at home with their family, with their parents, perhaps not with their children. And now there was just an incredible resurgence of the importance of identity and the language, the culture, and all that stood for. Language academies were popping up everywhere for people to learn Catalan. And it was, as I mentioned before, it was very interesting because my husband was studying Catalan. Well, we studied together. And in the class, there was my husband from Sevilla, as I mentioned, raised in Madrid, so already not your normal candidate. Me from Columbus, Ohio, and all of the other students were Catalan. And I think that was very symbolic of the times, that everyone was interested. Everyone was interested in learning and in improving their level of the language because of what that represented. And of course, there was a huge overhaul of the educational system at that time also in the schools, with all of the Catalan history now being introduced, Catalan movies being made. It was a very exciting time, a very exciting time.
Did you have a car when you first came here?
I'm sorry, did I?
Did you have a car when you first came here?
Oh, yes. We had the Seat. Actually, as a wedding present, Julio turned in his little 124, and we had a 1430. Wow, a white 1430. It was huge. It was huge. Here it was huge. It was like, where are we going to park this thing? So, yes, I would say that this is something that I do comment often. I'm a very visual person because I work in the arts and in design, and so I do observe proportions. And I would say one of the biggest shocks for me coming to Spain was the size of things. And then returning to the States for vacation, I would find myself staring at the cars in New York, and staring at the size of the buildings, and staring at the size of the supermarkets, staring at the size of the bananas. So everything was smaller, more reduced, more compact. And that has changed over the years, obviously. So I like to observe change in proportions, volume.
But in those early years that you were here, would you say there were more poor people in evidence than there are now? I mean, were people poor, and did you see a lot more of it?
Interesting question to think about. I would say that they say the poor will always be with us, and there have always been poor. I would say that there probably were not as many street people, whatever that means. Where were they? I think that I think that perhaps you noticed more the contrast between classes at that time because of the way people dressed. People spent an exorbitant amount of money on their clothing and to clothe their children. Little 1- and 2-year-old girls in the park who were not permitted to sit in the sand because their dresses cost more than my wedding dress probably. And I mean, an incredible amount of money spent on being just right, okay, and looking just right. And I remember receiving a box from the States the very beginning with some clothes and books and things that I had sent over, and among the things in there were my jeans. Finally, I got my jeans back. And they were nice, clean, freshly pressed, once I pressed them, jeans, and I wore them and went downtown, and I went home almost in tears. I went down to the post office for something, and when I returned, I told my husband, I said, a man stopped me on the street, and he said something to me, and I spoke Spanish because I was a Spanish major, so I did speak the language, but there were certainly many terms that I wasn't familiar with. All I knew was that he had said something very insulting, and what he said is guarra, más que guarra, and it's because I was wearing jeans. So I would say that, and so jeans at that time was a symbol of being a hippie or being a guarra. Now everyone's wearing jeans. And so I think that democracy has also sort of covered that terrain as far as making everyone a little more equal in daily life. You walk the streets and you can't point out the poor so readily. Whether in fact there was more of a class distinction or not, obviously there were many poor. Obviously there are many poor today. I think that there are more poor today perhaps for different reasons. And they're more obvious because many of them are living on the street. There are many more new poor, let's say. Yeah.
What did you used to do on weekends in those first years when you were here in Barcelona? What did you do on? You had a car,
on weekends,
so maybe
yeah.
in town.
Weekends, we like to go to the beach. We've never had a home outside the city. We didn't have a beach house, among other reasons, because we like discovering new places, so we liked going somewhere different. But we've always, especially since we've been in Barcelona, we love being in Barcelona on the weekends, because that's when you can really enjoy the city. That's when you can get around and get around easily and really enjoy what the city has to offer. We love going to the museums, we love going to the art galleries, we love the cultural events offered in the city, and that's when we take advantage of the city, really. And just taking long walks and riding bicycles, it's a wonderful time to be in the city. So we like to go out of the city, we like to discover places, but I mean, just this weekend, all day Saturday, we spent down in the Born, just enjoying the city.
In those earlier years, though, there wasn't so much culture. I don't guess in the 70s, middle 70s here.
No, there wasn't such a cultural offer, but there's always been something. There've always been concerts. There's always been the museums and the galleries have always been there. They've just grown and they've gotten better. Yeah.
Good. That's about it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was painless.
What would you ask yourself if you were asking questions about those years?
Oh, what would I ask? Oh, I can give you a real, it's not a question, but I can tell you a great example of censorship.
Please.
If you went to the movies, then of course there were no original version movies available. And so we went to a movie that was I'm not going to remember the name of it. It was a classic underground movie, but I can't remember the title at the moment. But in any case, we went with very dear friends. He's a Valencian architect. She's an American from Cincinnati, and we're still extremely close friends. Spent Christmas together, and their daughters are goddaughters, so they're that close. And so we went to the movies together. And during the film, they had. It was in English, and that's what we were excited about. So we went to see this, and during the film they were having tryouts for musical group, and so one after another would come out on stage and sing, and Linda and I were on the floor because translating the subtitles have always been notoriously bad here. Always, they're getting much better, and there are many fantastic professionals working in the trade now. At that time, they were deplorable. But one of the young women coming out with this angelic Mother of the Earth look to her, and she was singing, "Fuck the birds, fuck the sky, fuck the heavens, fuck the," etc., with the most angelic, beautiful voice that it was totally incongruous. And we were in hysterics. And people, of course, in the theater had no idea what was being sung. They could only read the subtitles that was saying, "Besa a los pájaros, besa al cielo, besa al..." And Linda and I are rolling on the floor, and people are furious with us, telling us to shut up during this beautiful song. So I always remember that as a true example of the ridiculous side of censorship. There's a much darker side of censorship, but that is just as absurd as it gets. That, and plus the Clark Gable film, in which so that it wouldn't look like it was a love affair that was taking place. They had them as brother and sister, which in the end made it an incestuous relationship. So you found things like this that you thought, wait a moment, señores, let's give it a little bit of thought, a little bit of common sense. Just throwing that in, because I can't think of that era without remembering those two examples. Questions that I would ask you. Let's see.
Well, that's great. I like that.
Okay.
That's an interesting anecdote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you ever go to France with friends to see films, or?
We went once, but we had many. We were living in Valencia at the time, and we have many architect friends who in Valencia, and there was a group of Valencian architects who would go up on the weekends, and they would come back with such bloodshot eyes, sitting in the Perpignan cinemas in the dark, for 3 solid days. And they were the caravans just going up and down. So there were a lot of funny things. I would say that one of the visuals that I have of the huge change it was almost from the day Franco died to the next day, is the number of pornographic magazines that suddenly came out of the woodwork. The kiosks. The kiosk had Semana and Hola and Tepe and, 5 Minutos, I don't even know what else, and the newspapers. And suddenly, it was all topless. It was all, the pendulum just swung so quickly. So quickly.
Were you here in '81 when they went into the Congress?
Yes.
Yeah. Where were you that day?
Where was I that day? I was at the home of some Catalan friends. I arrived, and they opened the door and asked where my husband, if I knew where Julio was. And I said, no. Well, I imagined that he was at the office, and they were the ones who told me what had just taken place. And so then I was trying to locate him, and of course there were no cell phones at that time, so it was not that easy. And so it was several hours later when everyone wanted to be at home and be glued to the television screen, wondering what's going to happen now. Mm-hmm.
So it's fairly frightening that evening.
Oh my gosh, yes, it was very frightening, very, very frightening. And to see what was happening in the streets of Valencia, and to recognize the streets of Valencia, and that's where I used to go shopping, and now there are tanks, and it was very frightening. Of course it was, yeah.
Great. Well, great.
Okay.
Good.
Close up.